Milk has very little natural trans fat. You can measure it in milk. Okay, so, some saturated fat will be trans fat, but it is exceedingly small and, for the most part, not to be worried about if it's real food. Really, trans fat is a synthetic phenomenon that the food industry puts in specifically to increase shelf life. So I think that we can ignore the inherent trans fat in real food and focus on just what the industry does to, sell their products. And that's what the FDA is worried about.
Let's stick on that milk piece, because this is a really important, interesting fact about saturated fat that not a lot of people are talking about. The fact that there's two different kinds, and you mentioned in red meat there's a type that's basically neutral. Within milk or dairy, there's the saturated fat that has possibly even a little bit of a benefit because it's anti-inflammatory.
Potentially, yes.
Is that just in cow dairy? And is there enough of a anti-inflammatory effect in there, in that special property, that it's worth people consuming to get that? Or it's just there for,
Yep.
Is there enough to consume dairy is what I'm getting at.
Is there a good reason to drink milk? That's what you're asking. All right. So the answer to that is, I believe the answer to that is yes. Now, this is a little complicated. Milk generates an enormous amount of visceral reaction. So let me unpack it. Let me take it apart for you. There are some people who are intolerant to lactose. Okay, full stop, stay away from it. There are some people who are intolerant to certain milk proteins and develop a, milk protein allergy. Stay away from it, okay? You will know, because if you consume milk and you end up having enormous GI side effects, okay, that's probably a problem, okay? If that's true, what you should try to do is you should try to take some Lactaid, so, lactase as a supplement, and see whether or not you still have it. And if you still do, just stay away from it. That is probably, those two things, lactose intolerance and milk protein allergy, is probably about 20% of the population. So not insignificant. There are a lot of people. African Americans have a significant increased risk of lactose intolerance. Jews have an increased risk of lactose intolerance. But that can be mitigated by taking lactase by mouth. By the way, I do. That's how I consume dairy, is with Lactaid, okay? Because I'm Jewish, the way it is. Okay, now the rest. What about the rest of us? Is there something in milk that's worthwhile? Number one, there's lots of amino acids, and that's good. Number two, there's lots of fatty acids, including some essential fatty acids. So that's good. Number three, there's a lot of calcium. Now, here's the problem with the calcium story. Everyone says you need calcium. You do. You absolutely do. No question. Calcium for bones, calcium for muscle functioning. Calcium is, calcium for hormone release. Okay, calcium is essential. And milk is a very good source of calcium. So you would say, well, then you should drink milk because of the calcium. And we tell postmenopausal women to drink milk because of the calcium, right? We give them vitamin D too, right? Wrong. This is the mistake. And the reason is not because there's not calcium, there is, but because there's way more phosphorus in milk. In order to absorb calcium, you have to have a calcium phosphate product that is conducive to absorption. And the problem is that the phosphate binds the calcium. So it becomes calcium phosphate or calcium biphosphate or diphosphate and makes it unavailable for absorption. So in other words, in order to absorb calcium, you have to have calcium without phosphate. And that's not milk. That's other foods, but it's not milk. So in fact, the calcium that's in milk is, for the most part, unabsorbable. And that's one of the reasons why giving milk to people with osteoporosis doesn't seem to benefit them. In fact, might even hurt them. Now, can you give calcium pills? Yes, you can give calcium pills, but does that fix osteoporosis? No, that doesn't fix osteoporosis either. And the reason is because the calcium just gets absorbed and goes right through you, does not end up in the bone. You have to do some things to the bone in order to get that calcium into the bone. And unfortunately, vitamin D is not the answer to that. That's why all of these trials of calcium and vitamin D in postmenopausal women have failed. So the notion that you can actually reverse osteoporosis by drinking milk, which is, of course, this, common urban myth that's out there, does not work. As a pediatric endocrinologist, I used to take care of multiple children with hypocalcemia, low serum calcium levels. And these kids sick. They have the George syndrome or congenital hypoparathyroidism or autoimmune hypoparathyroidism or, host of different diseases leading to hypocalcemia. And we had to boost these kids' serum calcium levels to keep them from having seizures and tetany and, and stopping of the heart and what have you. Okay. This is a big deal. In order to do that, we had to give them calcium and we had to make sure that the calcium was absorbed. So we actually had to take away the milk. We had to take away dairy. We had to give the calcium with no phosphorus. We had to increase the calcium to phosphate product in whatever they were eating to 4 to 1, 4 calciums to 1 phosphorus. Whereas milk is 1 to 2, 1 calcium to 2 phosphoruses. So we actually had to take away the milk and give them calcium without phosphorus. We had to give them calcium supplementation in the form of calcium gluconate or calcium chloride or something else, very specifically to increase the absorption. So this notion that milk is important because it has calcium is actually not correct. In addition, milk does not have vitamin D in it until or unless you irradiate it. So standard store-bought milk will be irradiated, and that's how it has high vitamin D. So you can buy unvitamin D milk, if you buy it from a local farmer or whatever, but that is not a good method for supplementing your vitamin D. So there are all sorts of issues with respect to milk. And then finally, let me address one last myth about milk, and that is that it causes cancer. And this all came from one book, and that book is called The China Study, written by Campbell and Esselstyn. And what they did was they looked at the population of China, and they did an epidemiologic analysis. 500 pages of single univariate correlations, and snapshot in time, no time component in the analysis. And what they came up with was that the consumption of dairy correlated with increased incidence of cancer. And so they said, therefore, milk causes cancer. And they said that casein, the protein in milk, the primary protein in milk, was the bad guy. Number one, this is not how you determine causation. Univariate correlations are not the same as multivariate correlations, and multivariate correlations are not the same as causation. In order to determine this, you'd have to have a time component, which they do not have. Okay, and also, there's this thing called reverse causation, where it might be actually people with cancer might have, altered, food intake. And it might also be that there's intermediate causation. Something else is causing both of those things that has nothing to do. Like, for instance, ice cream consumption correlates with drownings. Is it that ice cream causes drownings? Or is it that survivors of drownings, bury their heads in a banana split? Well, neither, okay? Ice cream usually is consumed when it's hot outside. People swim when it's hot outside, and some people who swim drown. Okay, so yes, ice cream consumption is correlated with drownings, having nothing to do with any causation linking those two things directly. Rather, there's an antecedent that leads to both of those separately. That's called an epiphenomenon. So it very well may be that, what they were studying in China was an epiphenomenon, not a primary causative phenomenon. There's no data that suggests that drinking milk increases the risk for cancer.
If you enjoyed that clip, press here for the full episode. I'll see you over there.
Ultimately, it's not what's in the food, it's what's been done to the food that matters. Everything fructose does to the mitochondria is designed to inhibit its functioning. It's metabolic health that drives